Do you know how many countries are there in the world? 193. Do you know how many borders there are in the world? Almost 200. Can you imagine a world with no borders? What would it look like? Would it be better or worse than the one we live in today? For most of human history, people didn't really have borders. They were nomads. Nomads of the Earth is a series that takes you back to a time when the world had few borders, when people traveled freely across the planet, exploring new lands and making it a more connected place. This is the first episode of Nomads of the Earth. Let's travel back to the year 2000 BC. The land we call Mesopotamia today is considered to be the birthplace of civilization. Here, between the fertile banks of the river Tigris and Euphrates, lived a group of people who were anything but civilized. Meet the Bedouins. These nomads travel from place to place, not in cars or planes, but on foot, carrying all their worldly possessions on their backs. They had no permanent homes. Their houses were tents made out of wool and goat hair. Can you imagine living in a tent for your whole life? Well, that's what they did. The good thing about tents is that you can take them down and move at a moment's notice. That was very useful because the Bedouins followed the herds of animals. That's right, they were nomadic herders. They traveled with their sheep, goats, cows, and camels, basically living off the fat of the land. Their days were spent looking after their animals, and their nights were spent telling stories around a campfire. Life as a nomad wasn't easy. There were droughts, sandstorms, and battles with other tribes, but the Bedouins were tough. They were strong and resourceful people who knew how to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And they weren't alone. All over the world, there were other nomadic people like the Bedouins, such as the ancient Greeks in Europe, the Celts in Britain, and the Xiongnu in Central Asia. But as the centuries passed, these nomadic ways of life began to disappear. People started to settle down and make one place their home. They built houses and farms, and they became well civilized. And then they did something else. They drew lines on maps and said, "This is mine and this is yours." They made borders, but why do we have borders today? Why do we need them? You're about to find out. Over the next few minutes, we'll travel through time and meet some amazing people along the way. We'll see how borders have changed the world and how they've affected the lives of ordinary people. We'll also learn about the environment and how borders have impacted it. So stay tuned. You won't want to miss a single episode. Here are some things you should know before we begin our journey. First, borders aren't just lines on a map. They're symbols of power and control. They show us which countries own which parts of the earth. But they haven't always been there. In fact, for most of human history, people could travel freely from one place to another without having to show a passport or visa. Second, borders can be dangerous places. They're often guarded by soldiers who are ready to defend their country from attack. If you cross a border illegally, you may be arrested or even shot. But sometimes people have no choice but to cross borders illegally. They may be escaping war or poverty, or they may be trying to find a better life for themselves and their families. Third, borders can be a source of conflict. When two countries don't get along, they may use their borders to try to gain power over the other country. This can lead to war and violence, which is why it's important for countries to find peaceful ways to resolve their differences. Finally, borders can change the environment. When two countries are separated by a border, it can make it difficult for plants and animals to move from one place to another. This can lead to the extinction of species and the destruction of habitats. But countries are also working together to protect the environment by creating protected areas and sharing resources. We hope you learned a lot from this episode. We'll continue our journey next time. So don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date. Thanks for watching. See you soon.